Kia ora everybody, welcome back to another episode of Untidy. My name is Hannah Davison, I'm a mother of two, I'm the co-founder and author of the My Big Moments children's books, and I'm very excited today because I'm here in person with two people, but first I will introduce my radiant co-host.
I also take that, thank you. Matilda Green, I'm a mother of three and an online content creator. Today, we are absolutely thrilled to be joined by someone whose work has transformed the way so many women approach their health and well-being, and someone who I have personally always really admired, Dr Libby Weaver, better known as Dr Libby.
You're a bit generous.
Well, I haven't even started the intro yet, Libby. You just wait.
Yeah,
just wait.
Sit back and have it showered upon you. This is actually like, some of our guests have been like, that was great. I feel amazing.
Yeah, well, it's a nice way to start a podcast when you just get hyped up a bit, and you think,
Let's pump her up. Let's pump her up.
So Libby is a nutritional biochemist, best-selling author, I think it was 13 times, and the founder of BioBlend supplements. For years, she's been at the forefront of women's health, helping people understand the deep connection between nutrition, stress, and hormones. Her books, particularly Rushing Women's Syndrome and The Beauty Guide, have empowered so many women to take back control of their health in a way that's science-backed, but also what I love about you is it's compassionate and non-judgmental. So we're going to get in amongst it today with a good old-fashioned deep dive into nutrition and how we can be intentional with our nutrition and lifestyle to optimize our energy, maximize our mental and physical performance, increase longevity, and generally just live life to the fullest, which is what we all want. So a huge welcome to Untidy, Libby.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's such a joy to be here in person with you both. So much better in person, isn't it?
So much better.
It's such a treat.
I know. And for those of you listening, it was already rare that Hannah and I would be in the same room together because, as you know, we record remotely. And so when we gave Libby one date, it was like, this is the date that we're going to be in Auckland. Will you by any chance be here? And she was. It was just
the stars aligned.
Yes,
it's so
the synergy
exciting.
is a joy. So thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I feel like I need to call you Dr. Libby because that's the
Can
only
you
way
please
that
not?
I'm fighting it, but it's not easy. I will let you know that. So if it slips out, you know why.
So as we were just talking about, Libby, the last time I saw you was when Art and I interviewed you for our podcast, Well and Good, and I was very pregnant with our son Milo, who's now 5.5. So that kind of puts a bit of a timestamp on it. So it's really lovely to connect again, but a lot of our listeners will be very familiar with your work, but I'd love to get a bit of an insight into your background and kind of who you are. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Tamworth in country New South Wales with chickens in the backyard, and Dad grew a bit of our own food. So that was sort of my first taste of nutrition. They'd pick an orange off the tree and it was just a random statement, oh, this will help you have some vitamin C that helps your immune system and it might help you not get a cold. So they were sort of just stock standard conversations in our household, and I've no doubt that probably planted seeds for my curiosity to learn more about nutrition. But anyway, I loved growing up there. Tennis was my sport, and did a lot of that, and then went off to uni and was there for 14 years, which I know makes me sound really thick and like I failed everything or went to the pub too much, which may or may not be true, but I very much
it makes you sound like the opposite, to be honest.
Yeah. I loved learning, and I still do. So I studied nutrition and dietetics, and then did honours, and then did a PhD in biochemistry. So there's lots of science in my background, but since then I've worked with people one-on-one. Can't believe it. It's been 25 years now. And that's where you get to see what really makes a difference in people's lives and also what doesn't. So I've combined my 14 years at uni with my 20 plus years of clinical experience to create what I call my 3-pillar approach. And those 3 pillars are the biochemical, the nutritional, and the emotional. So I look at everything through those 3 lenses and find that gives a beautiful holistic view of that can potentially make a difference in someone's life.
Wow, that's so amazing. So in your family, can you look back and see where this passion came, with the interest from the food and those comments, but then like that real scientific approach and that holistic approach? Like, what was the culture in your family? Where did it all come from?
I grew up very, very simply, and Mum and Dad still live in that same house.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah, they're in their 80s now.
Do you still have a room?
Yes.
Like, is it your room or has it been changed into a spare
Mum's
room?
sewing room.
Oh, it's always
okay,
becomes a sewing room, doesn't it? Yeah.
But Mum turns 81 next week, so I'll spend a few days and I go and stay there with them across their birthdays and things. So I'll be back in that little room again with my little old single bed.
That's so lovely.
Yeah, it is. So Yeah, my grandmother actually, she would come to visit, and she used to bring, and so this was in the late 70s, early 80s, and she would bring not what you would expect a grandmother to bring. I didn't get chocolate bars and things like that. She'd bring a bottle of yogurt, and she used to say to me, that was her gift to me, and she'd say, now the treat is you get to put a teaspoon of honey in it. So she was unlike other grandmothers, and as I said, it was sort of late 70s, early 80s, and she'd bring this little suitcase, and she had vitamin C tablets and vitamin E tablets, and she'd tell me what they were for. And so I feel like she was well ahead of her time, and she died in her sleep when she was 96.
Oh, beautiful. That's what you want.
And that actually led me to develop a little phrase that I don't just use in my work, but I think of for myself, and that is, I want to die healthy. I think we have this idea that things are going to deteriorate. We spend a really long time. We live too short and die too long. And I think it's really great to think what would help me have more of a health span, not just a lifespan. And my nana was very, I think, instrumental in me forming some of those ideas. But yeah, I originally wanted to study journalism because I loved writing, and had a journal, a diary from age 4, where I only wrote how many eggs I collected from the chickens. Gosh. They were my first diary entries.
So sweet.
But it got me in the habit of writing. And yes, I thought I wanted to do journalism. Then I studied psychology, and then found nutrition dietetics, which I loved. And nutrition is, one of obviously the pillars of my work, but spins my tyres.
Well, it's also quite reassuring that had an impact on you as a child, because I feel like I am just banging on to my kids about this sort of thing, and it's nice to know that it can land, you know what I mean, because like at the moment they're sort of just like, yeah, whatever, great, because they're only 5, 3 and 1, they're very young, but I'm like, this is going to help you not get sick during winter and this sort of thing, and they're kind of like, oh yeah, but I'm hoping that the same thing will happen that happened to you, Libby, and that it'll plant a seed, plant a little seed.
Yeah. And then you think, we've all got to go off and experience life in our own way. But with that as a foundation, I think we're a lot more likely to then come back to it. So it doesn't mean that we're going to live like it the whole time. I remember a really good girlfriend of mine, she's a very amazing whole food chef, and she raised her son, just to eat and nourish himself in this most extraordinary way. And he went off and joined the army and lived in this way that she was not comfortable with. And 7 years later, back he came, Mum, you were right. It's all landing.
Yeah,
they've
got to figure it out themselves.
Music to ears.
Yeah.
So your work is focused in a very needed area, which is supporting modern women who are balancing so many different things, and I think we can all speak from personal experience, just feel like a gerbil on a wheel the whole time, which is just going faster than we can actually cope with. And is that what you were seeing in your clinic that inspired some of your book, like Rushing Women's Syndrome? Where did this part of the drive come from?
Oh, so I actually can't believe that I wrote that book in 2011. So that's 14 years ago. And that just blows my mind. Like, how on earth is that possible? And I naively thought that it was just this little moment in time as to something we were experiencing momentarily, and the intensity obviously has only gotten quicker. It wasn't just a moment in time, it wasn't just a glitch in the system.
It's kind of a systemic thing.
And so I find that there's sort of a whole new group of women finding that body of work now. And so yes, it was based on my observation of quite dramatic changes that I was noticing in my patients. It was sort of between about 2008 and 2010, they'd walk into my office where I saw patients with way more intensity. And at first I would think to myself, I think, something really major's happened to this person. Is there some sort of trauma experience? And there may or may not have been. That's not my area, but obviously people would sometimes share some of those experiences with me. But the intensity made me think there was something really major happening. And it was just that, when we'd unpack it, they'd say, oh no, I was just running late. I tried to do 4,000 extra things this morning before I got here, and then I left it too late to find a park. So it was just kind of everyday life things that have since then intensified. And it led me to go down a real path of inquiry around, and I wrote a Rushing Women's Syndrome is not a medical condition. Obviously, it's just the name of my book. But it led me to go down a path, and it helped me see that we stress because we care. So it really comes from this beautiful place. Women care so deeply about so much and about so many people, and want to make a difference in others' lives and make sure the people they love the most in the world are all okay. And so that caretaking often goes beyond our own families and our own immediate people we love. It can reach out to the greater community and the whole world, really. But then my question is, beyond that, what are you needing from that? And what I could see is that we don't just care, we care what others think of us. And that's the part that we really need to unpack to stop the rush, so that we can still be of great service to others and have fulfilling lives ourselves without undoing our own health. And so for me now in my work, a lot of the juice, yes, is hugely in nutrition and preventing nutritional deficiencies like iron deficiency. That makes a massive difference to how someone feels. But it's also helping people to see that we are so often trying to maintain or gain the approval of others, and we're often unaware of that.
Yeah, that is so true, because I think in our society we've talked about this on the podcast before, actually, the term supermum, and how we've really glorified, like, oh wow, look at these parents or these women just doing so much, and how do you do it? Wow, that's amazing that you do that. And it's kind of put being busy on like a pedestal of like, look how much I can achieve and look how I can do it so well, that we're so conscious of having that appearance of like, of wanting people to think that we've got it all together and we can handle all this stuff and we're just sailing through life. But it's really difficult, and we need to just kind of take it off a pedestal, I think.
And it's just so detrimental, because then it just gives people permission not to help.
Yeah.
Oh, she's a super mum, she's got it all. No, she's knackered.
She doesn't need
She's
help.
doing
She can
too
handle
much. It's unsustainable.
Yeah.
So don't glorify it, because that's someone who's actually stressed out. And like, what about, there's that statistic about how marriage and children affects your lifespan, and for women, being married and having children like reduces health and longevity, but for men increases health and longevity.
I didn't know that stat. That's grim.
It is grim because, like, this is obviously a sweeping generalization, but I won't let that stop me. For men, they're often in the role where they then get caretaking, and they then get someone to, take care of them, provide them with good food, with life admin support, and so they're able to do more. Whereas women, they're then responsible for all of these people, doing that for all of these people, and then they're coming last.
That's it. And not meeting their own needs.
Yeah.
And when I say needs, even just basic biological requirements for good quality sleep and nutrition and movement. Yes, and you laugh.
Yeah.
It's like, sleep, wow. So, do I really need that? What a pest. But it's crucial.
Yeah, and so then if you are trying to do all of those things, but you are chronically stressed, how does that impact your hormones, and then how does that kind of differ from men? That's probably a huge question, so could be a whole podcast in itself.
Yeah, we could talk underwater about that for a whole weekend.
Yeah,
but it's so obviously when we produce stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, they actually communicate to the body that we're not safe, even though in modern times we are thankfully relatively safe. And so what's leading us to produce those stress hormones is primarily psychological stress. So I'll just unpack that briefly before we talk about the disruption to hormones, because I think it is helpful for us to reflect on this. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's very real and genuine stress going on in the world right now. There's very real and genuine stress going on in some people's lives, many people's lives. There is also, though, a huge amount of stress we create for ourselves because of how we think, and that's the part we can change. So that's when I talk about stress for the next 2 minutes, that's what I'm focused on, the stress that comes from our thinking that we can change. So I'll give you an example. Over the last couple of years, lots of people have worked from home, and so I like people to give me real world examples of what stresses them out. And so a common thing I heard over the last couple of years was, what stressed me out was when a colleague would phone me and say, "Where's that work? I needed it yesterday." And that's fascinating to me. And I ask, when I speak publicly, I'll often ask an audience, raise your hand if that would stress you out. And about 3/4 of the room put their hand up, but 1/4 of the room put their hand up when I say, put your hand up if that doesn't stress you out. And so when it's not across the board, that's one way to know that it's not real. That's how you know it's coming from your thinking.
Yes.
And
Interesting.
so when you think, what is stressful about someone asking you for work? And it's because we don't actually hear what someone says. We hear what we think they meant. And we do it all day, every day. And so what makes that situation stressful for some people is they've heard the request for work, but they've also perceived that their colleague is disapproving of them for not having done it already. And so we're often not conscious of that, but we'll create those stories many, many times across a day. And then at the end of a day like that, we'll say, today was really stressful, when it kind of wasn't. We did it to ourselves because of stories we've made up that we're actually unaware of. And so it's where I think becoming more curious rather than judgmental of our own responses and our own stress. I find that stress can actually be a really remarkable teacher if we allow it to be, because it's often a mechanism through which we're allowing others to judge us. So when I wrote a book called The Invisible Load in 2019 and ran focus groups prior to that. And for the youngest group of women I interviewed, aged 18 to 25, the top stresses by far and away were body image and social media. And when I share that with older audiences, they can't fathom how social media can be stressful, because they're using it to share photos of their children with their friends in England. I use it to watch wombat videos because I think wombats are hilarious. So it's entertainment.
Well, there's a garden vista that you'll be sharing. Yeah.
That's it. Whereas for, not all, but for a lot of younger people, it's a mechanism through which they gain or they seek approval. And if they're not getting it, that's what makes it stressful. So our stress can be a great teacher and allow us to reflect on where we're unconsciously allowing others to judge us. And that's getting super philosophical here, but a beautiful quote from Carl Jung's work, that until we make the unconscious conscious, it'll run our life and we'll call it fate. We'll think it's our destiny, but it runs our choices. So when we feel that we're stressed out to the max and running life at 1,000,000 miles an hour, it can really help to have those moments where we get really curious and ponder, whose approval am I seeking? And they might not even still be alive. That might be people who have passed away, who's just trying to live in a way that's congruent to the way they would approve of. So they're just some little moments that can sort of disrupt that feeling that life is really stressful and break it up, and we can see it for what it really is. That comes from our caring heart and caring what others think.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think like that's a really good opportunity for, if you're someone that journals, to have some questions to actually draw that out of you, because a lot of that is unconscious, and a lot of those things, you wouldn't feel judged unless you had that self-criticism already lodged inside of you.
Yes.
Like, what questions would you ask yourself in that scenario, if you were trying to draw out the narrative, some of the stories that we're telling ourselves that maybe would reveal that those things that we find stressful aren't based on fact?
I call it forward. One really simple little exercise I find that can shine a real light on it is, I call it forward words. And I developed it because I used to think that people walked into my practice with a word written on their forehead and they were traits. I don't feel like I enunciate that very well. TRAITS, traits that we want other people to see in us. So a great exercise to do is to take pen and paper and pick. It might be just a handful of people who are in your inner circle who you really care what they think of you, and ask yourself, what traits do I need them to see in me? And write them down. So when I did this exercise with my mum, it's so important that my mum thinks that I'm kind, thoughtful and selfless. And I can see that that's because I perceive she is very much like that. So she's going to she demonstrates those traits to others. She's going to value seeing them in me. So do I then have, whereas with colleagues, it might be that traits I need them to see in me: competent, hardworking, efficient. So it'll be different for different people. And then the next time you feel really worked up on the inside, you can pause and consider, am I perceiving someone is seeing me in the opposite way to one of these traits? And most of the time the answer will be yes. And the reason I find that helpful is it makes some of those things that are somewhat unconscious, it brings them to your awareness, and it changes how you respond to a situation then. So let's say you're running late for a work meeting and you're worried, you think, I'm stressed. Oh no, hang on, am I perceiving that they're going to think badly of me? Yeah, my boss and this particular colleague. So at the end of the meeting, you just might grab them and say, hey, I'm so sorry I was late. All sorts of chaos broke out at home this morning and I do my best to not let that interfere with me being punctual. But today it did. But it's just really important to me that you know that I care, that I value my job, I'm a team player, whatever you need, whatever traits you want to bring forward. Now they're just going to be grateful that you care that much and you choose to express that. And it also, I encourage people to think about what that would then how it would lead them to operate across the rest of that day. Because if you don't say that and it remains the elephant in the room and you just think, oh, was stressed this morning, you're then going to run yourself ragged trying to prove to your boss and your colleague that you're hardworking and efficient and that you care. And you'll say at the end of that day, oh, it's really stressful. But it wasn't. we do that to ourselves. So those forward words, I think, can really help us to cultivate flexibility in how we can handle others seeing us, and kind of save that. We're going to care what others think, but save it for your real inner circle who kind of deserve to be there in your heart, I think.
Oh, I love that so much. And it sounds like also just addressing it right then and there, you know, like rather than letting things fester. It's like, and that can be a thing that in general, I think women do a lot of as well, you know, because we don't want to, sometimes like being direct and having those sorts of conversations feels a little bit foreign at times. And so we need to be better at that, just addressing how we want to be perceived in that moment, or doing what we need to do to just put it to bed and then kind of move on with the next moment or challenge.
Yeah. And that was a big segue away from hormones. So I'll just quickly round back to hormones. I don't think we go hormones altogether. So obviously when we're producing adrenaline from all those different things, because it says to every cell in our body that we're not safe, it can say to your gorgeous little ovaries, probably not a good idea to ovulate this month, because we can't risk conception when we're perceiving that that you're kind of not safe right now. And so through the HPO axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, ovarian axis, ovulation can be disrupted because of that stress response and the signals coming from the pituitary. And that can affect fertility, and it also the disruption of ovulation also has a bigger biological effect, because progesterone's a really beautiful anti-anxiety agent, and it's a diuretic, so it allows us to get rid of excess fluid. It also it works on GABA, so that lovely calming neurotransmitter in the brain. So the consequences of stress hormones disrupting those ovulation essentially can have pretty significant consequences.
So those stress hormones are going to be really affecting our longevity, right? So how can very busy women who are, because I'm listening to this now, there'll be listeners tuning in that are going to be like, well, I can't remove these, a lot of these stresses out of my life. Like, I'm busy. There is nonstop. I had friends staying the other week, and we were sitting outside on the deck on the outdoor furniture, and it was so lovely because I got to do that with her, and I have outdoor furniture, and she goes, oh, do you just love sitting out here and having your morning coffee? And I'm like, I don't sit down, unless I'm at my desk. Yeah. But I'm like, and she's like, maybe on the weekends. I'm like, let's say sometimes on the weekends. But yeah, so the knock on the stress on our, sort of affecting all of our body systems and affecting our longevity, it's so hard because what do we prioritize first as women to combat this overload?
So I love that you just used the word prioritize. So we literally can't change that there's 24 hours in a day. And that's the question. What do you care about? Because we're going to prioritize what we care about. And if we will essentially see evidence of, so we prioritize what we value. And when I say values, I don't mean ethical preferences like kindness or generosity. What does your day-to-day life demonstrate that you value? What do you think about? What do you spend time on? What do you spend your money on? What do you literally prioritize? And you'll see someone's values, and health might not be a value in that. Spending less time in the stress response might not be a priority in that. It might be that someone is currently living in a season of their life, and it's just a chapter where tending to the needs of very young humans is their absolute priority. And that means that all sorts of other things that they would otherwise prefer to do is going to be compromised. But we understand that it's not forever. It's just how it is right now. And so we can keep it in sort of see it as that season, see it as that chapter. I think that can help when we know that it's not forever. They're little for such a short amount of time and require, endless attention and having their needs prioritized. They require that really for a very short amount of time in our very long lives and their very long lives. That's one thing. And then the other thing I would say is, when your friend says, about sitting out on your lovely outdoor furniture and having coffee in the morning, I probably would challenge you that you don't actually want to do that. You would rather be doing other things, because if you really wanted to do that, what I've found is if we really want to do something, we will find a way, and it's just not your vibe right now. And that's great. And that's okay, because you're prioritizing what's in your heart and what matters to you and what you value. And that has an enormous ripple effect in the world that makes a difference to other people and to your children. And it will be on some level incredibly fulfilling and enriching for you. And I think just in hearing you share what you shared, I just think there's a little voice, and a lot of us have this, there's this voice in our head going, yeah, but you should be doing it differently. But a should, I think, is a sign that it's like an injected value from someone else, that we should be living in a different way. And I'm not into the shoulds, because that's your value system. I hear you. And really it's being said in a very caring way. Take some time for yourself. But you might find that you do that in other little micro moments. It might be when you're driving, you're noticing the sky or the trees, or you'll have other little things that you do that you probably don't even speak about, that it's just, and that's how you nourish yourself right now. So I remember saying, I was speaking one night and I was talking about watering my vegetable garden, and because I grow some of my own veggies, and a lady came up to me at the end of that night, and she wanted to punch my face in that I had time to water the garden. She could not cope with the fact that I did that at the end of a day. She was very triggered by it for some reason. And so I inquired, and I said, do you grow vegetables? Oh, well, I used to, but I don't have time now. And so I said, can I challenge you that your vegetable garden is currently not a priority for you, but you're judging yourself harshly for letting it all go to seed and not doing that right now. So do you feel like you're not being a good enough mother because you're currently not growing vegetables, you're buying vegetables? Like, is there some... And that's, our eyes welled up. We were onto something. There was something in that. So I find that when there's something that we think I should be doing that, we kind of need to let ourselves off the hook a little bit, because it's someone else's values that we're trying to take on and embrace, and it's not necessarily where we're at. We might do that again one day, or we might embrace that in the future, but it's okay for it not to be like that right now. Where I would then counter that is when you have health issues. So when your body starts to give you symptoms and signs that the way you're living is not sustainable, then you want to act. So that's when, if you were saying to me, have chronic headaches, or have chronic reflux, or I have terrible challenges with my digestive system and my bowels, or my periods are so incredibly painful, or whatever, wherever there's feedback coming from the body, that's a nudge, I think, asking us to make some different choices, either with how we eat or drink or move or think or breathe or believe or perceive. And we have a voice inside us that has our back, and we, as women, we need to trust that way more. So when it's time to sit on your outdoor furniture and have a coffee in the morning, I feel like that'll arise in you, because you're such an aware, gorgeous human. You'll be, it's a bit much. I'm going to do that now. And even though it's only 5 minutes every morning, it's the time in my life that I'm going to do that. That's my vibe.
Yeah. No, and I will say you are absolutely right.
I don't need to. Didn't say it to be but I was just suggesting perhaps that's a way for us all to look at the shoulds.
And I think I find that really helpful and also quite freeing, because, something that came up in me when she was talking about the morning coffee and sitting down, and there was a bit of a should in me, like, oh, there should be a bit more space in my life. But then there was also like, I don't want to sit down.
See? And you're happy.
I get that. I wake up an hour before I need to get up and I meditate, and that gives me 2 to 5 times deeper rest and sleep. So I'm doing that then. No, it's not a morning coffee.
Exactly.
But I'm like charging myself for the day then, and then I'm doing my day, which is busy. But I feel really purposeful. But it feels, I know I'm running the system hard, but I'm trying to support the system as much as I can. I'm supplemented up the wazoo. I rattle.
Love it. Yeah.
But I'm just like, this is half of my stomach capacity. But I'm like, well, that's the way I choose to do things, because this is the period of my life when it is just, the pedal is to the floor. But it is reassuring to go, this is also a phase, and this is a chapter. This is a period. I'm going to shift out of this at some point, but this is where it's at. And I think we fall into that trap of comparison and shoulding on ourselves.
Yes.
And that is tricky. And then you go, God, all that expectation and all that comparison, then that and judgment, that adds so much more stress. And if we can let go of that and have some more compassion and some more acceptance, well, how much is our stress going to come down?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And it's actually something that I see quite often on social media, just talking about that woman who was talking to you about the watering the garden. It's often, I see it a lot on people that mothers, and they might be posting about, I don't know, a calm moment or watering the garden or doing something like that. And there are always so many comments from women being like, that's not a real mother, it's, I wish I had time to be, doing that, or like, oh, well, that's not realistic, like that's not, show me a real mother's life. And it's like, when did we get to this point where we feel we can say to other people that they're not a real mother because they are prioritizing something else, or they're doing something differently, or they have a different life like we all do? And it's just a really kind of sad state, I think, when so many mothers are so, their nervous system is completely out of whack. And I think that's where that kind of comes from. And then it's like, how come you get to do that and I don't? But it's just, that's such a lovely way of framing it, I think, of just like, what are you prioritizing right now?
Yeah. And I remember talking to a friend who, she was also always a bit like unconventional when it came to wanting to even be a mother. Like, it took her a long time to come around to wanting to be a mother. And then, when you start having babies, and I remember this as well, like, and everyone's going to the Plunket morning teas together and stuff, and I never felt like I really fitted in there. And I remember her talking to me one day, and she goes, it was such a great moment the day that I realised I didn't need to do it the way that other people were doing it. I just needed to mother in my own way. And then she was like, I felt so free from that because I didn't feel the pressure of like, I should be at the Plunket morning teas and enjoying it. She's like, it wasn't my bag. And she's like, once I realized I didn't have to mother that way, I could mother just my own way, then things got a lot easier.
What a gift.
Yeah, what a gift. So like, what is a real mother? A real mother is a mother who's authentic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And caring for her babies.
Oh, absolutely.
However, we can't talk about mothering without talking about sleep. So can we talk about circadian rhythm and how it impacts our health? And, I feel like the way that I manage my sleep, probably not optimal, I would say. Like, get to bed probably... These are my shoulds. Like, I should get to bed earlier. I should get this number of hours sleep. But I'm like, I don't know. My body seems to think 6 to 7's great. I probably get to bed a wee bit late, like 11:30. But my body's naturally waking up around 6. So, am I shitting on myself? Like, can we talk about circadian rhythm? And what is optimal? How's it affecting us?
So, yes, what a topic. So,
again, settle in for the next week.
Yeah. So, biologically, as adults, we require, block your ears, Hannah, 7 to 9 hours per night. So biologically, we need that for all of the repair work that needs to go on while we're asleep, and all the other processes that can only happen while we're at rest. So when we are getting, doesn't matter if it's occasionally, but when it's consistently less sleep, there are some things that are compromised. Now, obviously, I hark back to what I said a moment ago. There are times when little humans are going to need us in the night, and there's nothing we can do about that. And I think accepting that rather than fighting with that or stressing about that is just the best present you can give yourself, and keeping it in perspective that they're young for such a short amount of time in your big long life and theirs. So I feel that helps to keep, it feels like it'll never end, I know, but it helps keep it in perspective, I think. But then once they don't need you in the night, then you have the choice as to whether to prioritize that. And if you can sleep, some people can't sleep. They really struggle to fall asleep or stay asleep, or there are many people who wake up and don't feel refreshed. And there's information in all of that about things that might need some extra support. But if you're not prioritizing sleep long term, I do think it does eventually arise to kind of, you get a little poke, a little whisper at first that you probably need to change that. And if we don't listen to the whisper, that's when the body will start to roar. And it does, we know that sleep has a big impact on even our appetite hormones and satiety hormones are affected by it. It's when our stress hormones are at their lowest, and because our brain is less active with conscious thoughts. So our stress hormones can actually get to be low again, but our cortisol starts to rise at about 2 a.m. And so it's true what our grandmothers said, that a couple of hours of sleep before midnight are actually a bit more valuable than those after midnight.
My grandmother actually did say that.
Yeah, same.
Oh, she 100%, yeah.
And it's true, because the cortisol starts to rise at about 2 a.m. and that's preparing you to get up with energy and vitality to, ready for the day ahead. So it is terrific if you can get to bed at a decent time.
Maths is on at the moment. Like this is probably
It creeps
a
in.
bit of an
It creeps
interruption.
We can't fight our biological requirement for it. And if you have trouble falling asleep, there's a couple of things I would say. Obviously, light disrupts our melatonin production, melatonin being our sleep hormone. So getting some fresh rituals before bed around exposure to light, especially from backlit devices, can make a big difference to how sleepy you actually do feel. Creating some kind of ritual later in the evening. It might be dimming the lights in your home and turning on lamps rather than overhead lights, or making a cup of chamomile tea, just lighting a candle. There can be some little rituals that you embrace that sort of signal to your body that it's time to slow down and prepare for sleep. And then obviously the thing that science currently knows that helps us activate the calm arm of our nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, is extending the length of our exhalation. And so if you think about the pages of a book, it's in the shape of a rectangle. So if you run your finger along the top of, Petra Baghurst actually said that to me. I used to say to people, draw a rectangle on a piece of paper, and she said, it's good, you just use a book. And I thought, that's brilliant.
Genius.
That is genius.
Rather than
So you breathe in along the top and then
exhale down the long side.
Oh, we like
That's
that.
so good.
Isn't that great?
I love that.
And just go around the outside of your book, 3 or 4 times, and it will really calm you down, and that too can prepare you for lovely sleep. And if you wake up in the night, you can picture a book and breathe in around as you trace the outside of a book.
Oh, that's brilliant. And then nutrition wise, if are there some kind of, not rules, but guidelines that you use for people that want to support themselves as much as they can, but it can be really confusing for people because there's so much noise on social media about nutrition, and people are fighting about oats, they're fighting about bananas, you can't
big
have
issue.
oats,
It's
you can't
really
have oats, bananas are bad for you, bananas are good for you. It can be really difficult for people to know. And I remember last time I spoke to you, Libby, you were saying, some people can get through a whole day without eating one vegetable. And I was like, I could easily
100%.
get through a day without vegetables. But that really stuck with me, because now I'm like, okay, I'm going to prioritize even just like a little handful of something, and like berries or spinach or whatever with every meal if I can. And so do you have any kind of rules like that can help people make better choices?
So firstly, it makes me really sad that nutrition has become this really confusing subject for people. And I will agree that there are times in our lives, or people with certain medical conditions who might need very specific nutrition advice. In general, though, the way I would describe it is there's no such thing as junk food. There's just junk and there's food. But at the moment, we call food whole real food. And as humans, for all of our history, up until the very recent past when the junk was actually introduced, all we ever ate was food. So the junk is very new to us. And when I was little, the junk was only available at birthday parties. So that was pretty exciting. But now it's become part of people's everyday habits. And that's the problem. It's what we do every day that impacts on our health. It's not what we do occasionally. It doesn't mean, when I say eat food, not junk, that doesn't mean that we're not ever going to eat eat some hot chips, for example. They're delicious. No one's going to stop that. But there's a world of difference with your health if you have them 3 times a week every week for the next 5 years versus if you have them 10 times a year. So it's how often we do that stuff. So my message with nutrition is to eat food and really do your best to minimize the junk. And let's say, to keep it really practical, let's say right now we might eat 35 times in a week. So 7 days a week, 3 main meals, 2 snacks. That's 35 times. Some people will eat more frequently than that, some less, but we'll use that as the average. Let's say right now 7 out of those 35 meals are made from actual food, whole real food. If you just include 1 more real food meal or drink or snack per week, which I don't think is overwhelming to an individual or a family, just 1 more per week, within 2 months, you'll be at 14 or 15 out of 35, and you'll have literally doubled the amount of nutrition going into your body, and you'll have minimized potentially problematic substances that were going in the junk. So you've kind of halved that. So it doesn't have to be this all or nothing concept. It's just let's have some awareness around where we're getting our nutrition from. I think too, the language we use around food, looking at that is also important, because and it's why people I think get confused that things have shifted. I thought that was healthy, and next minute this is not healthy. The banana conversation, my goodness. And so it's more helpful to say food actually isn't healthy. People are or they aren't. Food is nutritious or it isn't. And so if you're confused, you could look at a banana and say, is this nutritious? And the answer is yes, because it contains all sorts of vitamins and minerals and fiber and antioxidants. So that is nutritious. That will nourish you. That will actually give you some bang for your buck. Whereas,
Great. Leave the nannies alone.
Yeah.
God, get away from my smoothie.
That's it. So, whereas a lolly, when you say, will this nourish me? There's literally no vitamins or minerals in it. So there's no nutritional benefit. You might perceive there's other benefits for you, but there's no nutritional benefit. And so you mostly want to make your food choices nutritious, because it's the only way that nutrition gets to be inside your earth suit. So that's sort of a simple way to, I think, break it down and relax a little bit and think, don't get me wrong, there are people who, when it comes to what they allow to go into their extraordinary body, they need to care more and they need to raise their standards in a way that's practical for them. But there are other people at the other end of that spectrum who are really quite frightened of food, and they won't allow XYZ to go in their mouth, and I would suggest that they'd have better health if they relaxed a little bit and maybe had some hot chips. Like there's no health when you're frightened of food, and there's health struggles when we're not giving ourselves enough nourishment. So I think a lot of really great health happens sort of in the grey.
Yeah. Have we lost this sort of like instinctive evolutionary ability to detect and determine for ourselves what should be going in our mouths? Animals do it. They know what to eat and what not to eat. They'll be selective about plants. Why can't we? Where's that gone?
Supermarkets have sort of mucked that up a bit, haven't they?
I agree, Maddie. Yeah. And it's also that we seek external advice for everything now. And I'm not denying there are certainly experts who can play a role in people's lives, but in outsourcing all of our information, we don't trust ourselves anymore. It's all still there. We just don't listen, or we don't trust that inner knowing, because, if no one else is eating bananas and you think they're still okay, so you think, oh, I thought they were okay, they feel okay to me. We don't trust ourselves because we think that the last 6 videos we saw is more trustworthy source of information. So that's not, experts have a place when it comes to nutrition, absolutely, but we've lost touch with our own inner voice, I think. And especially, it's actually probably one of the things that I talk a lot about. People think the opposite of stress is calm. I actually think it's trust, and trusting the unfolding and trusting ourselves so much more, and that beautiful inner wisdom that we all have.
Oh, I love that. Well, I mean, on the supermarket thing, it's like we have lost the ability to know what is in season and what's not. Like, unless you seek it out for yourself, it's not obvious. You go into a supermarket and you can just get whatever you want all the time. My son, who's 5, he was talking about strawberries, and it was last year, and he was like, oh, we can get the frozen ones, and like we can get strawberries and whatever. And I was like, we can, absolutely, but the thrill of a strawberry is that you don't get it all the time. It's like it comes into strawberry season and it's so exciting, and then you get to eat heaps of them and it's fun and it's something to look forward to, and then it finishes and you go, okay, now I'm sad, but we get them again next season and it's fine. And I also read something that I found really fascinating, and how the difference in blood sugar spikes from eating fruit that's in season versus not in season, and it can spike your blood sugar higher if it's out of season, because your body isn't in sync with it, which I thought was really fascinating.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think price will sometimes be a bit of a guide. Cucumbers right now are 99 cents, and in the middle of winter they're going to be $5. So sometimes if we're a bit confused, the price will kind of make us go, oh, maybe that's not quite in season right now. That can be a little teacher. But that's fascinating about the fruit.
And what about supplementation? So you founded BioBlends, which I'm looking forward to talking to you about. I've just started taking the Liver Love, which yes, I'm very excited about that. But my question is, how does supplementation fit into a healthy diet? Like, does everybody need to supplement, or can we get everything from diet?
I'm the first person who wishes we could still get everything from food. It's the center of my learning. I don't believe we can now for many reasons. Conventional farming practices, stress hormone production, and just the pollutants that we are so very sadly exposed to just on a day-to-day basis through what we eat and drink and absorb through our skin and breathe in, unfortunately. So some of those we can control and some of them we can't. So I am a fan of it in general. I think that, again, recognizing where you might be falling short. So, for example, iron deficiency is the most common nutritional deficiency in New Zealand, particularly amongst toddlers and women of menstruation age and pregnant women. And it's just what I find is that so many women just say, oh yeah, I've been iron deficient my whole adult life, it just sort of sits there in the background. And so we think we get used to living with low iron, but we need iron not just for energy, because iron is needed for the transportation of oxygen through our whole body, including to our brain. So we need iron for energy. We also need it to literally be able to produce thyroid hormone. So some people don't actually have a thyroid problem. They have iron deficiency that's affecting thyroid hormone production, and that's not talked about enough.
No.
It's needed for phase 1 liver detoxification. You need iron to be able to produce dopamine, which we need obviously for happiness, motivation. You need iron to be able to produce GABA, that lovely calming neurotransmitter. So there's actually really robust scientific literature looking at people's experience of feeling really anxious and iron deficiency. And so it's really important to know your iron status. So, and quite often supplementation is required, but some of them are good quality and some of them are lousy. So sometimes we need to supplement because we have a really clear deficiency like that. Other times it's because of what I would call more an insufficiency. So when we might be living hard and fast, we're just not eating enough food, there's way too much. I'm not keen on the idea that supplementation can replace a lousy way of eating. I think eating in as nourishing way as possible is something I would always encourage. And then just suitable supplementation. So it might be an organic green powder, for example, so you're getting more veggies going in, more antioxidants. But yeah, I founded BioBlends back in 2016, and the big difference with BioBlends is that it's all made from food, and it's not synthetic and made in a lab, and I have really painful standards. I'm a real pest to work with.
But
with my standards.
So refreshing though. It's tough out there trying to pick a vitamin.
Yeah, and it's reassuring to know that quality is there, because like you go to the supermarket, you see a wall of vitamins, you don't know what's good, what's not good. You're also thinking about your budget. Like it's a real challenge for consumers with no training and nutrition to make those decisions. And then you go, is the cheapest one as good as that one? Like, how do I tell the difference? So what are some of the downsides of like mass produced vitamins, the wall of vitamins in the supermarket? What are the traps we fall into there as opposed to taking something like BioBlends?
I don't want to ever put down something someone is doing. So if someone is taking something and feeling really good, I'm never going to put that down. But if I could start fresh with someone, I would say don't choose synthetic. Don't choose something that's made from food that your body beautifully food, and I use medicinal herbs as well in BioBlends. Look for that. And also a lot of supplements have been formulated by marketers, not from people with a background in nutrition. And so it's just because it's a trendy thing right now, and they won't necessarily know that the combination of nutrients don't actually work properly together, or that there's things that in a product that will disrupt the way your body's going to utilize some of the other things in it that you're actually trying to obtain. So look to the background of the company to make sure it's been created by someone who actually has expertise in nutrition and knows how to formulate a product is another thing I would say. Food-based and well formulated.
Oh God, and I think that's the tricky thing these days, isn't it? It's so hard to know who has made this product. You're right. Like, is it just a fancy brand, kind of like a fancy white label sort of thing that, so anyway, now we asked our community on social media to send in questions that they had for you. There are quite a few, so strap in, but we can always we'll just see how we go. We'll just see how many we can fit in, basically. The first one, somebody said, she is iconic, by the way. That was the start of the question about you, Libby. She said, does she have nutritional advice for PCOS and hormonal acne? What foods to include or avoid?
Oh, so if this person is experiencing that, the first thing I would say is understand how challenging aspects of life will have been up until this point. There are a lot of people with PCOS who suffer really terribly in silence. I actually think it's a really poorly named condition. So it's a condition of excess insulin and excess androgens, and they're the things that disrupt ovulation. So with any condition, with any scenario where we're not ovulating, that's what you want to get to the heart of. It might be, over-exercising and under-eating can lead to a thing called hypothalamic amenorrhea. So we want to correct whatever is leading to the person not ovulating. And with PCOS, it's the high insulin and high androgens and addressing those. So what I've seen make a difference is there's a beautiful herbal combination called peonia and licorice that actually helps the pituitary talk to the ovaries to signal ovulation, and it helps to reduce those androgens. And then that usually starts to allow ovulation to happen. So that's a big factor. And when it comes to nutrition, obviously addressing high insulin can be a big thing, and that's where I would simply say eat food, not junk, and don't get too stressed about reducing things. Just try not to eat too much sweet food. With patients I've worked with PCOS, it's been that herbal combination, the peonia and licorice, coupled with basically don't eat sweet other than 1 or 2 bits of fruit a day, and it makes a big difference to the insulin.
Awesome. Okay, and next question is how to help deal with endometriosis, which seems to be really common now.
Yes, very much. And I think there's still a lot of women who have it and they're not diagnosed, but our awareness is growing, and also our awareness of what's contributing to the suffering. So I actually went to a conference a couple of years ago, and a gynecologist presented on it, and she's done a lot of surgery. She was trained at uni to do surgery with endo for pain. But what she described was that there are many women who have endometriosis and they don't actually have pain. So that's why they don't know they don't have it. That's why they don't know they have it. And then there are others who they have endometriosis and there's terrible pain. And then her teaching was to remove the endometrial lesions to reduce the suffering, to reduce the pain. And mostly for a lot of women, it didn't make a difference. And so she said it can't be the lesions, because the women with endo with lesions who don't have pain, how do you explain that? So there's so much we still don't know about the condition, and is it actually related to, is it related to estrogen? What's estrogen's role in it? I feel like that's become more and more uncertain, if anything. What's the immune system's role? There's more evidence emerging that that could be linked to the gut microbiome. So a lot of women with endo also have, they really struggle with things like IBS and other gut sort of based conditions. And does improving gut function make a difference then to the endo? So in my clinical experience, what I've seen make a difference is a super, super strict dairy-free way of eating. Be very mindful of caffeine and alcohol as well. I won't go so far as to say as to cut it out, but those, just really get honest with yourself about how much those things are actually your friend or not, and save them perhaps for special occasions. But the super strict dairy-free way of eating was the thing that I found made a big difference to endo. Sometimes additional liver support makes a difference too with herbal medicine.
Oh, that'll be really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's a big one. So there's a couple of perimenopause questions. So one listener is in perimenopause and on HRT, and his water retentions, electrolytes don't work. What can I do? And I don't know if this next one would be tied into that, but there's also advice for losing perimenopause belly fat.
Okay. So when perimenopause actually has 3 stages, Lara Bryden's done a beautiful job outlining that in her book, The Period Hormone Repair Manual.
We've had Dr. Lara on the podcast.
She's brilliant.
Yeah,
She's great. So she describes in her book how there are 3 stages to perimenopause, where the first one is we stop ovulating regularly, which means we're not producing progesterone. And we talked earlier about how it's a diuretic. It allows us to get rid of excess fluid. So the first thing I think when someone says that they're retaining fluid is that there's a huge lack of progesterone. So when she says she's on HRT, I'm not sure if that's just pure estrogen or if there's some proper progesterone in that. Sometimes a synthetic progestin is used and it doesn't have the same effect as actual bioidentical, body identical progesterone. So it might be worth looking at that, or it might be that the dose needs adjusting, or it might be that the body is saying this is not quite right for us right now. There are other things that could be done, and that's the beauty. It's really beautiful right now in that the word perimenopause is everywhere. Not very long ago, it was only a word that health professionals used, and there's benefits, huge benefits, but there's also some drawbacks to what's happening in that space right now. So the benefits obviously are that more women understand what's happening with their body through that transition and get the help and support that they so desperately need and deserve. The downside of this of the perimenopause kind of conversation being everywhere is that I find that a lot of women I talk to between the ages of 38 and 55 attribute anything new that they experience to it must be perimenopause. And the trouble with that is they are blaming it on their changing sex hormones, which are badly named. We shouldn't call them sex hormones, but just so listeners get the gist of what I'm talking about. We attribute what we're experiencing to changes in sex hormones when it could be all sorts of other things. It could be iron deficiency. It could be the thyroid's not working as well as it once was. You know, there's myriad, it could be insulin resistance, could be all sorts of things that are happening. And the trouble is if we just think it's our hormones, we won't necessarily address what's actually going on. The other downside of the current style of perimenopause conversation, which is not this person's question, and we'll come back to it in a sec, the other downside I find is that there's a whole group of women coming along, I'm 50 behind my generation, going, I'm terrified of this. And you don't need to be. Because right now there are women who suffer in a really debilitating way through perimenopause. There are women who suffer very mildly, and there are some women who don't suffer at all. There's no sleeplessness, there's no heat, their periods just literally stop. And we don't hear from them. And I interviewed women from all walks of life last year around this topic. And the biggest reason that the ones who aren't suffering don't speak up is because they feel guilty. And they don't want those who are suffering to feel bad. So they don't say anything. But the trouble, and I understand that, but the trouble with that is it means that the next generation of women think that everybody suffers, and they don't. So rounding back to the question, I'd be looking at progesterone with that fluid retention, and that's why the electrolytes aren't working, because it's actually probably related to progesterone. And then the weight gain, I'd be looking at high insulin, because with the other hormonal changes that happen at perimenopause, it can mean that insulin gets a little bit jumpy and it can become consistently elevated. So you want to do a blood test for fasting blood glucose and fasting insulin to see if there's insulin resistance. That's quite often what leads to that belly fat that doesn't want to shift.
Oh, that's so helpful.
I hope so.
helpful.
I hope so. We want it to be practical.
Yeah. And I appreciate this is hard because these are all quick fire questions and they're all big topics. But yeah, we want to get to as many as we can.
Are there any safe ways to lose weight while breastfeeding without it affecting milk supply?
So I have had that question probably 800 times in my working life, and my response, I hear the person, I appreciate that that's a goal for them. My response, both from a nutritional perspective and also just as a woman with a heart, is that it's not the time to focus on that. We get this one opportunity to give that bubba that milk, and your health matters way more than weight. So if this person asking this, I understand why this person is asking this question, and she's not alone in asking that question, but her health matters way more. So is she well? How's her energy? What's happening with her skin? Skin is sometimes a great insight into what's happening inside. What are her bowels like? What's her digestion like? Is she getting headaches? If there's anything in those departments where she's struggling, then I would encourage her to address those things. Weight loss will probably be weight loss is a natural outcome. Let me backtrack. If our physical structure has more body fat than is healthy for us or ideal for us, then correcting any health challenges will lead the body to have less body fat. If someone doesn't have enough body fat, correcting their health challenges will make them have more body fat, so they're in a more healthful state. So weight, I encourage women to not make weight the focus ever. Think about your energy, think about all the other things that go into giving you a really healthy life and focus on that, and set about correcting or addressing those health challenges rather than on weight. Not just now with breastfeeding, but at any stage.
100%. And I feel like the conversation should shift, as you're saying, to nourishment.
Yes.
You know, like I remember
Maddie, yes.
after I'm having my son, all I wanted was just like a big bowl of porridge with like maple syrup and cream. It's like, this is just what I feel like. And my midwife said to me, she was like, just make sure you don't do anything like cutting out carbs or anything like that. Because she must see that quite a lot of like women that have the babies and they're like, right,
pre-baby genes.
Time to jump into action. It's like, let's not cut things out, you know, let's focus on the refeed. Okay. Tips for increasing fertility.
Focus on ovulation, obviously.
Yes.
So, and fostering that in a lovely cyclical fashion. So the biggest thing that allows us to have, we need great nutrition, obviously, for regular ovulation, and some of the key nutrients for that iodine, selenium, iron, zinc, vitamin D, and essential fatty acids. Just that little short list, but we can get all of that from food. So they're the key nutrients for ovulation. But then the biggest thing that allows us to ovulate, we touched on earlier, and that's the perception of safety inside of us. So there's this extraordinary region in our brain called the hypothalamus that forever asks the question, am I safe? And if it looks into your blood supply and sees that there's high circulating levels of adrenaline because you've had 6 coffees and there's 400 unopened emails and that bothers you, that doesn't bother everyone, I have learned. But if that bothers you, then you'll be producing adrenaline. And it doesn't matter if we do that sometimes, but for a lot of us, we live like that every day. That's a surefire way to disrupt ovulation and therefore fertility. So I say, at my women's weekends, I'd say I do a little exercise, write down what has to happen for you to feel safe. And it's fascinating when you ask someone that, because some people look at you like it's the strangest question ever, because it's obvious, isn't it? They'll say, surely if the windows and doors are locked, we're all good. Others will go straight, when you ask them about safety, they'll go straight to their financial situation. Others will immediately talk about their children and what's happening for their children and what has to happen or what has to change for them to feel safe, but it's all linked to their kids. So in other words, what has to happen for us to feel safe is highly individual. And if you ask yourself that question, and then so you understand what's important to you, it sounds very esoteric, but it's not. It allows your hypothalamus to say to the pituitary, we're good, we're safe. And safety fosters that beautiful regular ovulation. So that can make a big difference. And you can develop, you can do that you can journal. It might be meditation. It might be doing the rectangle breathing around the outside of the book page. But there are little rituals we can get in our life that allow our body to be reminded that it's safe. And so I encourage people to find ways to communicate the truth to their body, which is that they are safe. That's one of the best things in the universe for fertility.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay. Will be our final question because unfortunately we are running out of time. So how to stop hair loss for women that are experiencing hair loss?
Oh, I love this question.
And this gets the core of me as well, because I've got Maddie knows. The
journey.
listeners know. I'm on a hair journey, and it's really tricky. And it sucks. It sucks when you feel like you're making progress and then you're like, oh no, I've lost some more. And then you're like trying to figure out everything you should be adjusting. So feel for this listener, here with you on the journey. Hair loss, what can we do?
I'm going to rattle off all the different things that can be contributing to it. And sometimes the first place to start is a blood test to actually know what might be happening for you, because lots of different things can be driving it. And I have a phrase in my work, the road in is the road out. So you want to understand what's created it in you, because that's the thing you need to address. So I sound like a broken record talking about iron, but iron deficiency is one of the biggest causes. And when I say that, so ferritin is our iron storage, and in New Zealand pathology labs, we're told that a ferritin of between 20 and 220 is normal. We need normal ranges. It'd be chaos without them. But in my clinical experience, if a woman's ferritin is under 50, it can be contributing to not just hair loss, but lousy energy and all sorts of other things. So I'm not happy until a ferritin is at a minimum of 50. I pursue it. I want it to be at 100. So just because you get blood tests back and go, oh, it's fine, and your ferritin might be 22, it's just inside the normal range, it's not robust enough for good hair, for robust hair growth. So look at iron. Zinc is another really big one and another very common deficiency, because the only food it's in these days are oysters, red meat, and then there's a small amount in egg yolks and seeds, sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds. So it's very easy to not be getting enough zinc through the food that we're eating these days. That can lead to hair loss. And then the other big one, or two more big ones, is an issue with the thyroid gland. And again, very worth having blood tests done. TSH is a pituitary hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone. The pituitary makes that, and it's the common first port of call in a blood test. It doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't give you enough information. And you want to also test T4 and T3, the two thyroid hormones. So looking at that. And then the final thing is what I refer to as excess androgens. So androgens are, women and men both make them. Men make more of them. Testosterone is an androgen. And for some women, they push to they might not be out of the normal range, but high in normal range of androgens. That can lead to hair loss. So again, addressing those androgens can make a really big difference. There can be some insulin resistance wrapped up in that, because sometimes when androgens go high, insulin also goes high. That can be a vicious cycle. They can feed each other. Constantly high insulin can make androgens go higher and vice versa. So that can be a little cycle that needs breaking. So, but again, there's, dietary changes and herbal medicine can be really beautiful if that's what's happening with the androgens and the insulin, like we talked about with the PCOS situation. But yeah, any of those 4 or 5 things I just mentioned, it's really worth working out what it might be for you and then addressing that thing.
Great. Thank you so much. A very nourishing podcast, I think.
I know.
A lot of nutrition in here.
I know.
Yeah. So if people want to connect with you after this podcast or get your BioBlend supplements, where can they reach you? What's your website and social media?
Oh, that's really kind. So my website is drlibby.com, so drlibby.com, and then bioblends.com. So yeah, with it, BioBlends, we do it all out of Hamilton, and my team are based there, and they're like my little family. They're very beautiful. So yeah, it's all, our BioBlends is all done there. So very, very proudly New Zealand made from local ingredients and also imported ingredients, and yeah, something that I hope makes a difference in people's lives. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's such a joy to sit with you girls. Thank you.
It's
it
been
was lovely.
Such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for all that you put into the world, I just want to acknowledge all the work that you do and how you have empowered so many women to take, charge of their own health and well-being. And yeah, I just want to say thank you. Thank you. Amazing. And thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And right back at you both. Thanks for how you care and the way you put that all out into the world in all sorts of different ways, both of you. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Till next time.
Until next time. I know, I feel like there's so much more we could have talked about. It's very hard to stop, but I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right. And thanks everybody for listening, and mā te wā.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Untidy. If you enjoyed it, we would really love your help to support us to continue to make the show. Things you can do that make a huge difference is subscribing to the show so you never miss an episode. You can also leave us a little 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And of course, please share this podcast with your mates. It means that we can continue to build this community, keep putting out untidy episodes, and just keep doing what we love to do.
And don't forget to check out mybigmoments.com for kids' books that make your tricky job of parenting just a whole lot easier. Untidy listeners get a discount at checkout, so just pop in Untidy for 10% off your order when you check out. And lastly, we would like to thank all of the good people that make this podcast possible: Flicker Williams and Joe Rocker at My Big Moments for the beautiful artwork and design, and Maxine London Creative for editing this episode. Thank you so much, guys. Take care. We'll see you soon. Mā te wā.